Too much news going on to get your head around? Sick of the media's left-wing slant on everything? The Other Side Australia is your free weekly shortcut to Australia's best commentary from a sensible centre-right perspective. The following segment is a shortcut from episode 9 of The Other Side Australia, originally uploaded Friday, October 23, 2020. To hear the full episode 9 and this week's episode 10, subscribe to The Other Side Australia on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or any good podcast platform. And if you're not into podcasts usually, you can easily listen on YouTube. Just search up The Other Side Australia. Now, Ray Radowski joins me as we explain the Hunter Biden scandal, part 1. Uno, dos, tres. And joining us now, as always, to talk about North America, our North American expert, Ray Radowski, the cool Canadian. How are you, Ray?
I'm great, but the wheels on the Biden campaign bus appear to be falling off.
Yes, they're not going round and round, as the children might say. All right, let's just take a step back, because Australians are swamped with information. We've got all our own things going on down here that are just way over the top. And there just isn't enough headspace for this American stuff. So I'm just going to try and guide everybody through this step by step. So let's go back to the beginning. Hunter Biden is the son of Joe Biden, right? And he and his business partner joined the board of a Ukrainian energy company called Burisma back in 2016, I think?
2014.
Sorry. Okay, back in 2014.
While his father was vice president and overseeing Ukraine as part of his portfolio in the Obama administration.
Exactly. So in my mind, that's it. I mean, that in itself is enough to really say that some red flags should have gone up immediately, and Joe Biden and Barack Obama should have said, hang on a minute, Hunter, this isn't good. Now, Joe Biden said in January this year that it was a mistake for his son to have taken that $80,000 per month board position back in 2015. And he promised that should he become president this year, none of his family members will have any involvement with any foreign government at all. And Hunter Biden, too, said that he made a mistake for which he bore full responsibility, according to the Washington Post. Now, the story doesn't end there. The second part of the whole drama, stay with me here, folks, is that there was a man named Viktor Shokin. Viktor Shokin was the Ukrainian government's prosecutor general. He was in charge of large investigations into corporates in particular. And Shokin was investigating Burisma over stuff that happened before Hunter Biden joined the board, but nonetheless would have affected Burisma's future earnings pretty badly. So this was going on. The Ukrainian government was investigating Burisma. When Joe Biden was vice president, he strongly pressured the Ukrainian authorities to sack Shokin. He warned the Ukrainian authorities that if they didn't sack Shokin, the country could lose around $1 billion in loan guarantees from America.
Why is the vice president, or the then vice president of the United States, trying to get a prosecutor fired from investigating a company in which his son is on the board of? That alone, that sentence alone, is enough to make anyone kind of think, what's going on here?
Yeah, and people did ask that question, and the response from the Democrats was that Shokin's firing wasn't just because of Biden's threat to withhold the $1 billion of loan guarantees. They said it was because of Shokin's repeated failure to act against corruption, and to be fair, there were concerns that a number of other Western nations had about Shokin. And it is true that the firing of Shokin followed a push for anti-corruption reforms developed at the State Department and coordinated with the European Union. So maybe Shokin wasn't a good guy and Biden was right to push hard for him to be fired. But it all doesn't look great. And then to make matters worse, Biden spoke at a Council on Foreign Relations event and bragged about how he forced the then Ukrainian president, Petro Poroshenko, to do the firing. Let's have a listen to that.
I remember going over convincing our team, or others too, convincing us that we should be providing for loan guarantees. And I went over for, I guess, the 12th, 13th time to Kyiv, and I was supposed to announce that there was another $1 billion loan guarantee. And I had gotten a commitment from Poroshenko and from Yatsenyuk that they would take action against the state prosecutor, and they didn't. So they said they were walking out to press conference. I said, no, I said, I'm not going to, or we're not going to give you the $1 billion. They said, you have no authority. You're not the president. The president said. I said, call him. I said, I'm telling you, you're not getting the $1 billion. I said, you're not getting the $1 billion. I'm going to be leaving here. And I think it was, 6 hours? I said, I'm leaving in 6 hours. If the prosecutor's not fired, you're not getting the money. Well, son of a bitch. Got fired. And they put in place someone who was solid.
So, Ray, that was Joe Biden bragging about the fact that he used American funding as leverage to get the president of Ukraine to fire the special prosecutor. Maybe not because he was investigating Burisma, but boy, it sure looks bad when his son is on the board of that company and would have stood to directly benefit from that investigation not going ahead. Now, this brings us to last year and the phone call that led to the impeachment proceedings against President Trump. Trump spoke to the new Ukrainian president, Zelensky, on July 25, 2019. And according to the now famous rough transcript of that phone call, he said this: I heard you had a prosecutor who was very good and he was shut down, and that's really unfair. I'd like you to do us a favour, though, because our country has been through a lot and Ukraine knows a lot about it. There's a lot of talk about Biden's son, that Biden stopped the prosecution, and a lot of people want to find out about that. So whatever you can do with the Attorney General would be great. Biden went around bragging that he stopped the prosecution, so if you could look into it, it sounds horrible to me. Okay, that's from the Trump call transcript with the new president of Ukraine, Zelensky, in 2019. Trump was then impeached because of his move to freeze military aid to Ukraine just after that July conversation. The Democrats say that was to pressure Zelensky to investigate the Bidens, and the call was improper. Trump says it wasn't, and the call was perfect. Trump said it was totally appropriate for him to ask Zelensky to look into what went down with Hunter and Joe and Shokin because it needed investigating. Zelensky repeatedly said that he felt no pressure from Trump to establish any investigations into Biden. The Democrats said, of course he'd say that. The military funding was eventually released anyway. The Democrats carried on with their impeachment, but it didn't get past the Republican-controlled Senate. Now, a cynic might say that the entire impeachment was a really good way to confuse everybody and muddy the narrative so that the Biden allegations would get lost amid all the impeachment coverage. And they'd be right. The focus wasn't on Biden and anything that he might have done wrong, any conversations he might have had that he shouldn't have had, pressuring and using American aid in the wrong sort of way, to whether Trump had had an improper conversation and was using American aid in the wrong sort of way. Pretty clever strategy if you want to confuse the picture, Ray.
And the interesting thing about that is, while it's clear from that clip you just played that there was some sort of quid pro quo for, in the Biden scenario, fire the prosecutor or you don't get $1 billion in U.S. aid.
Right.
There doesn't seem to be any evidence of quid pro quo in the Trump situation, where he asked about whether or not there's going to be any investigation into the Biden dealings in Ukraine. That prompted the impeachment, which did not go any further because the Republican Senate didn't push for that afterwards.
So the new episode that's been happening this week, Ray, explain to us what that's all about. A laptop turned up in Delaware.
Well, apparently, according to the New York Post story, which is the fifth largest newspaper in the United States, while it may be a tabloid, it does have some cut through. Hunter Biden dropped off his laptop at a shop in his state of Delaware to be repaired and never picked it up. And then as a result of time passing, the shop owner was entitled to keep the laptop. When he opened it up, he discovered a lot of things on that laptop that were quite shocking to him, that included all sorts of emails that outlined things, his various business dealings, photos depicting drug use and other sordid behaviors. So he turns that over to the FBI, keeps a bunch of copies for himself. and the FBI do nothing with it. So then he turns it over to Rudy Giuliani, who then turns it over to the New York Post. And then we have this situation where the story blows up. Interestingly enough, it only blows up in conservative media. Joe Biden refuses to comment on it, and the mainstream media doesn't report on it. CNN, MSNBC, Washington Post, New York Times, they all just either talk about it as some wacky conspiracy theory, or they just dismiss it entirely as a smear.
Which I can't believe, given all the steps that it took to get here, which we just talked about. I mean, this is if this was Trump, right? You can't imagine the ruckus and how this would be stirred up and beaten up as a story.
Well,
and we've got much more possibly credible information here than we've ever had on the Trump phone call or any of that sort of stuff. So you would think the media would be all over it, and they're just ignoring. This is deliberate ignoring. It's quite terrifying.
It's a real story. And you've got these guys, Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, who are the icons of investigative journalism. And there's none of that in this situation. These emails sort of start to tie in what did Joe Biden know at the time of his son's involvement in the Burisma deals and things like that, and effectively compromise him as a potential presidential candidate. Like, why he's a presidential candidate despite all of this stuff that was sort of known in the past is bizarre. But the fact that he's refusing to comment on it, and now the media is not only refusing to cover it, but most importantly, you talked about the various stories. The big story in this situation involving the laptop and the emails is the big tech censorship of that story.
Yes.
Twitter blocked the story from being shared, and then closed down or blocked the New York Post's Twitter site until it takes down those stories.
It was extraordinary.
I think that it is extraordinary because while the normie voter might have looked at all this stuff and kind of said, oh, well, politicians are politicians and they're always going to do stupid things. The First Amendment, freedom of speech, freedom of the press are something that now clearly are under threat in this election. And that, I think, is where the pivot has gone from the emails and the laptops and this complicated Ukrainian story to look at how big tech sides with the Democrats and censors any content or news stories that it doesn't like.
Yeah. I mean, that has become the dominant story now. It's quite extraordinary and quite scary. Ray, the biggest rating cable TV news show in America is the Tucker Carlson show. Tucker Carlson's been onto this story quite heavily this week. Let's just have a listen to his take on the big tech thing when Jack Dorsey, the founder of Twitter, issued a statement.
We have just heard from the CEO of Twitter, Jack Dorsey. He tweeted this, quote, "Our communication around our actions on the New York Post article was not great, and blocking URL sharing via tweet or DM with zero context as to why we're blocking, unacceptable." Huh. Writes like a child. Manages the company like one, too. By the way, the Biden campaign is able to call the story, quote, discredited because big tech is trying to discredit it. No reporter has taken a look at the story and concluded, oh, sure, this is a Russian fabrication. Putin did this. That's ridiculous. So the Biden campaign is using big tech as a pretext for not responding. And big tech, of course, is trying to prevent you from reading it at all. Where does this go from here? If Biden's elected, you really think that the big tech companies are going to stop doing the bidding of their masters in Washington? Not a chance. You think big tech is going to suddenly think, oh, you're allowed to think for yourself? No.
No. Okay, that's Tucker Carlson from Fox News, which, of course, is the Murdoch network in America, affiliate of the New York Post, which is a Murdoch newspaper which broke the story. In Australia, we've seen this story run pretty heavily on Sky News, which is Murdoch's outlet here. The Democrats have tried to run with the narrative that this was all part of an orchestrated Russian smear campaign and some kind of Murdoch media conspiracy. Adam Schiff, who is the chair of the committee that did the impeachment against Trump, a prominent Democrat, He's the one who's been out very, very loudly saying that this is all a smear campaign and that the Russians' hands are all over it. That has been absolutely dismissed now by all of the government agencies involved in the investigation, saying that there's absolutely no indication of any kind of a Russian involvement here. I really think this is a case of the Democrats just trying to muddy the waters. I still don't understand why other media are not picking up the story unless they are totally in the pockets of the Democrats. It does all seem to be quite scary from that point of view. Initially, there was some questions about the veracity of the laptop. Was it real? How did it get there? How did all this sort of strange story about how it came about? But it is understood to be real. That's sort of being investigated, and the Murdoch press is standing very firmly behind the idea that it's real, Ray.
That's right. You've got a situation where the bill of sale has been verified. Nobody from the Biden campaign has denied this. And then you've got people that were involved in those emails, including a couple of Hunter Biden's former business partners who are attesting to the fact that, yeah, I have these emails as well. So in other words, the recipient or the sender of some of those emails can verify that this is not a plant, this is not a hoax, this is not some sort of conspiracy. It's Hunter Biden's laptop with Hunter Biden's emails and a bunch of photos of Hunter Biden doing some very unsavory things.
One of the senior reporters at the New York Post that's working on the story is the Australian columnist Miranda Devine. She's known pretty well in Australia and as a long-time Sydney journalist. Miranda's now in New York. She has spoken about the fact that how she can be so certain that the laptop is the real deal. Let's have a listen to that.
So Facebook and Twitter had absolutely no problem, as you said, 2 weeks ago with Donald Trump's leaked tax returns. They had absolutely no problem when CNN played audio recordings of private conversations that Melania Trump had had. No problem with the entire Russia collusion stuff, the hoax that was perpetrated by the New York Times and the Washington Post, etc. And no problem at all with the Steele dossier when BuzzFeed was spreading that everywhere, that, is shown to be utter nonsense and was utter nonsense on the face of it. So Twitter and Facebook, the social media giants, are lying now when they say that they're just trying to protect the public and, stop malicious information, and then they need to do fact checking and that they don't like material that's unauthorized. I mean, so much of journalism is publishing so-called unauthorized material that other people don't want you to have. And we don't live in communist China quite yet. And yet these oligarchs in big tech are treating us as if we are fiefs in their authoritarian regime.
And already your critics are lining up. They will say things like, well, let's look at some of the names that are involved, like Bannon and Giuliani. These guys know how to play dirty pool. How would you respond to that charge alone?
Well, this has absolutely nothing to do with Russia. That's just ridiculous. And secondly, yes, Rudy Giuliani was the one who brought the laptop, Hunter Biden's laptop, the hard drive, to us. That's true. But that's because Hunter Biden left his laptop at a Mac repair shop last April in Delaware, and then he failed to pick it up. He abandoned his laptop. And the guy who owns that Mac repair shop sat on it for 8 months. He's owed money by Hunter Biden for fixing it because it was water damaged. And then he's watching the television. He sees the impeachment stuff. It rings a bell with him. He has a look at what's on the laptop or the hard drive. He contacts the FBI. Doesn't contact Rudy Giuliani or anyone else. FBI. They come along. They pick up the laptop. Then he hears nothing. The FBI has done nothing. So he contacts a senator, a conservative senator, Mike Lee. Sends an email, no response. Sends an email to a conservative group, no response. Sends an email to Rudy Giuliani because he saw him on television talking about the whole issue about Burisma. And lo and behold, Rudy Giuliani is the only one who pays attention to this guy. There's the story. And so, there's no apology for us publishing actual emails from Hunter Biden's laptop, which show that his father, quite contrary to his protestations that he knows nothing about Burisma, knows nothing about his son's business dealings overseas, emails show that Hunter Biden arranged a meeting for his father with one of the top executives at Burisma.
And that's Australian journalist Miranda Devine from the New York Post, the newspaper in New York that broke this story, speaking on television there to Good Morning San Diego. Ray, I just want to pick up on that point that Miranda made about the fact that the media, the mainstream media, are suddenly worried about the veracity and details of this when there seems to be quite a large amount of circumstantial evidence to prove that there is, at least some legs to this story and certainly questions that need to be asked, and it should be being covered. She made the contrast between that and how quick the media are to jump on even the slightest rumor about Donald Trump. No matter how poorly researched or flimsy the initial information might be.
Compare this story with the story from the Atlantic magazine a few months back suggesting or alleging that Donald Trump a few years back made some disparaging remarks about fallen U.S. soldiers on a trip to France. And again, that was debunked, but it was played up huge in media, even though there were no legitimate sources. It was one of those 4 unnamed sources type of stories, whereas this is a laptop that clearly belongs to Hunter Biden and has his pictures all throughout it. There's no dispute of this. And the last time that Joe Biden appeared in public was a number of days ago, and it was to buy ice cream or buy milkshake with his granddaughter. And that was what the media were covering. And as soon as somebody started to ask a question about the scandal, he laughed it off. The rest of the media laughed at the reporter, and Joe Biden stormed off.
The rest of the media laughed at the reporter. It's the same sort of thing we're seeing in Melbourne when journalists try to challenge Dan Andrews. I mean, the pack mentality, the group think that journalists are supposed to not let themselves fall into professionally and when they're operating collectively, but they do. That was Ray Rudowski and I explaining the Hunter Biden story simply right from the start in episode 9. But wait, there's more. To find out what Hunter Biden has been up to in China and how the story has evolved in the past week, check out the full episode 10 of The Other Side Australia on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or any good podcast platform. And if you're not into podcasts usually, you can easily listen on YouTube. Just search up The Other Side Australia.